I will call the November 22nd, 2021 school board meeting to order. It is 7:05 p.m. We are in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West Ninth Avenue. Ms. Moon, please call the roll.
Ms. Rayleigh? Yes. Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Here.
Ms. Neufeld? Here. Mr. Phillips?
Here.
Mr. Allen?
Here.
Mr. Doman?
Here. Thank you.
Nadia Ewell? Here. Will Floro?
Here. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Before we begin tonight, I just wanted to take a moment and acknowledge the horrific incident that happened in Waukesha yesterday. I know that many in our community have been deeply impacted by the event. This is on top of a difficult verdict in the Rittenhouse trial that was handed down on Friday. That was also felt by many in our community. And we are soon likely to hear the verdict of the McMichael trial in the killing of Ahmaud Arbery. My thoughts are certainly with those impacted and struggling with these situations. I know our families and students are navigating these difficult conversations and trying to make sense of these violent actions. Just know that if you need help, the district has resources available. These resources are available to both our staff, our students, and our families, and you can contact them at 1-800-236-3231. Again, that is 1-800-236-3231. And those resources are available for both our staff, our students, and our families. With that, we will begin with our public comment on non-agenda items this evening. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input decision making. The board requests that individuals limit their comments to each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into a debate with members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. We'll start in the room, and we'd like to make non-agenda items. Please come forward, take your name and address, and you have 2 minutes.
Mary Jo Randall, 727 North 59th Street. I'm here to talk about Kristen Bauer's conflict of interest in the acquisition of the AVID program. You all have this email from Public Records dated August 4th, 2018 from Kristen Bauer's to Dr. Ertl. I talked to Brett about AVID implementation and the planning year. As I expected, he has lots of great, lots of great insight. 2 whole school implementations will do that. Smiley face and applause. He suggests that we have the board approve the district-wide implementation of AVID soon so that we can send people to the district director training in October. Then we go back to the board with the recommendation to add the 9th grade AVID elective class when we have the board approve other courses in November. Once those are set, we spend the remainder of the year planning. That would include organizing AVID site teams in each building and identifying who attends summer institutes next year. He also has some great ideas for how to tie in our instructional framework and alignment to the equity plan. I can share more with you on Monday. And Dr. Earl says, thanks, and thank Brett. You also have received copies of paid receipts signed by Kristen Bauer's, paid to AVID, one dated March 26, 2021 in the amount of $9,350. Another dated July 2nd, 2020, approved by Kristen Bauer's in the amount of $22,950. Now, we all know nothing went to the board. No board approval was even sought until February of this year, 2021. There was a presentation to add a secondary elective class in November of 2018. That was not an action item. That was a report to the board. So, guys, I know you've been duped. I get it. I understand that it's embarrassing. What I don't understand is the lack of urgency on your part since all of this information has been brought forward to you. I just don't understand it. Currently, Kristen Bauer's compensation for 2020 through 2021 was $137,671, with fringe benefits equaling $45,113. That's according to the Wisconsin DPI. There should be some sense of urgency about resolving her paid administrative leave at this time. She's been gone for over a month. She's getting her full pay. You guys need to decide either she comes back to work or she's terminated. There's no excuse for this lack of urgency.
Joseph McLuke from 772 North 116th Street. Members of the board, when are we going to properly address issues surrounding the implementation of Avid? Apparently not tonight, as it is not a single agenda item on tonight's meeting docket to address this issue. It is simply amazing to me that after actions taken during last meeting to release attorney-client privilege in this matter, along with the investigative report that came out, we do not have that single agenda item to discuss or provide additional information to the public about this issue. Do we believe that if we simply do not talk about it, it will quietly fade away? It will not. Nepotism, ineptitude, and incompetence are about the only ways I can describe and see how this is allowed to take place. Shockingly, the district under former Superintendent Ertl spent taxpayer money to seek a legal opinion and advice from their own counsel on a clearly obvious issue that promptly turned around and ignored that advice, and it happened under your watch. As far as I can see, this could happen only one of three ways. One, board members knew what was going on and went along with and approved of it. I certainly hope this is not the case. Two, board members had an idea what was going on and simply turned a blind eye in order to maintain culpable ignorance, quite possibly. Or three, we were so simply incompetent in our oversight roles that was simply allowed to go on directly under your noses. In any case, this board has a role in what went on. I congratulate you. You helped give this district a nice, big, shiny black eye. After this is all that happened, how can student families trust you are doing what is in the best interest of their students? Simply put, they cannot. How can the taxpayers trust you are doing the right thing and being good stewards of the taxpayer money entrusted to you to educate our students? Again, they cannot. As a result of this, there is simply no trust in the current board. In order to help restore that trust, I am hereby requesting that all board members step down from their seats and it be done in such a way that those seats can be filled during the upcoming election. Therefore, it is hereby recommended that the current members of the Wellston School Board resign their seats in order to help restore confidence in the board action, and I so move.
Jamie, are there any public comments online?
Yes, we do have one. Todd Dahlgren, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Todd Dahlgren, 1647 North 122nd Street. I'd like to start by saying thank you to Mr. Meyer and Mr. Rowland for their willingness to speak publicly for the Channel 6 report last week, and Dr. Means for his attention to the matter of the Avid curriculum. 2 weeks ago, I stood in that room just before 11 p.m. and requested transparency from the board and district regarding the implementation of Avid in the district. The report 8 days ago on Channel 6 validated that request. That it took nearly 90 minutes in closed session that night for this board to reach the conclusion to waive privilege is concerning given what was reported. The time needed to discuss the matter in closed session suggests that some board members needed to be convinced that it was the right thing to do. Surely it did not take that long to confer with counsel and write the brief statement that Mr. Rowland read at the end of the meeting. My questions to the other 5 board members are, why were you not willing to speak publicly to the reporter? I suspect some of you were in a position to know what happened prior to the open records request. What did you know? When did you know it? It is disappointing to know how AVID was implemented in the district by Dr. Ertl and Mrs. Bowers and potentially others. It is more disappointing that those actions have now adversely affected some of our students that AVID has helped. Had the previous administration followed the correct procedures and been honest about what the program could accomplish, I believe that the public would have trust in what had been done. Those that were involved in this should be embarrassed and should seriously consider their future ability to guide the education of students. Thank you for the time.
Anyone else? with their hand raised?
We have one more. Danielle Long. You have the microphone. Please state your name and address.
Good evening. This is Danielle Long. I live at 2622 North Menominee River Parkway. I'd first like to thank and commend Dr. Means for the email that he sent out to staff last week regarding the Rittenhouse verdict. I would encourage you to ask him about it. I won't read the entire thing, and I know that it was meant for staff. But the bottom line is it was a very neutral and appropriate email that he sent, encouraging any discussions about the verdict that takes place in classrooms to be fact-based. This is in contrast to the August 2020 letter sent out signed by Drs. Ertl, Jessup Angers, and Nassif Rogers. That letter referenced the Jacob Blake shooting and in quote said, the shooting of, quote, yet another unarmed Black man. As someone who works in the criminal justice system and knew the facts of this case, I was disturbed by that statement that was made that did not have facts attached to it. Upon the conclusion of the investigation, I reached back out to Drs. Ertl and Jessup Anger and asked if they would send a corrective statement. I received no response. Please keep your politics out of our classrooms, especially when you don't have the facts to back up your statement. I would further like to thank Dr. Means for working to hold the responsible parties related to the AVID contract accountable for their actions with this conflict of interest. I'm deeply concerned that attempts were made by Mary Jo Randall many, many times to bring this to the board's attention, and it appears that she was completely ignored. Why wasn't it until a reporter started asking questions that members of the board started paying attention? I commend Mr. Rowland and Mr. Meyer for your willingness to come forward and agree that this is problematic, but it seems like others are not willing to do so. While I understand that there is an investigation in place, and again, I'd like to commend Dr. Means, this is going to be tens of thousands of dollars, very likely, spent on this investigation after hundreds of thousands of dollars have already been spent on this contract. I'm asking you all to be accountable for your actions, hold Ms. Bowers accountable for this. I have concerns that the board must have known about this. And so I'm asking you to be transparent and move swiftly. Thank you.
There are no more hands raised.
Sure. We'll move on to the consent agenda.
Mr. Zollner,
Yes.
may I respond to one of the comments? It would be very non-political. I would just, to Mike Meyer, like to suggest that people interested in the Rittenhouse verdict seek out analysis that's available in the mainstream media from defense attorneys. It is very educational to hear what they say about how trials work and what they think about the proceeding. Not to comment either way, but I did that and it's very informative for me, and I suggest it may be interesting for other folks as well. Thank you.
Moving on to the consent agenda, are there any items on the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Second,
Any board comment or questions on the consent agenda? Any community comment on the consent agenda? We'll start with those in the room. Oh, sorry. I apologize. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Sharon.
Thank you. I just have a question, and it's not something that
have to get back to me right away, but I wanted to ask about, this consent agenda, we have many coaching assignments. And I wanted to ask about the review process for coaches and making sure that there is parent input into that process as well, and also student input, as well as, oh gosh, I lost my train of thought, but no, why did I? Okay, well, anyway, those two things.
Yes, ma'am, and I'm really proud to say that Ms. Botch and I met with our athletic directors to close the fall season and prepare for the winter season. And one of our conversations was around the evaluation process that we currently utilize. I think Ms. Botch would like to have more time to work with our athletic directors to tighten that process. But it is definitely on our docket for work to be done this school year yet. It is an area of that requires attention.
Okay, thank you. I remember, and it's actually one thing I wanted to bring up because of the student school board reps. We talked about social media and the use of social media, especially in occasions where it might be a person-to-person cell phone, and I'm wondering if we have some progress there as well in a way that the district can provide a better means for that interaction.
Between coaches and student athletes?
Yeah, student athletes, even, we talked about with the student school board reps, how can they contact their peers in a safe way without using personal accounts and that sort of communication.
Yes, no. Understood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other public questions? Move on to community comments on the consent agenda. We'll start with Emily River. Seeing none, Jamie, is there one online?
No, there's no one online.
Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Neufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Jellman.
Yes.
Mr.
Move on.
Doman, before we, Mr. Doman, before we move forward, could I just ask the board members to speak directly into the microphones so we have good audio through the Zoom session?
Thank you, Jamie. We'll move on to the special education action item. Approval of the gradual placement. Ms. Neufeld.
Yes, thank you. It is recommended that the board approve the Cladwell School tuition contract service agreement, and I so move.
Good evening. I'm Therese Kwiatkowski. Oh, sorry.
Second.
Second. All right.
Ready? Thanks. Good evening. I'm Therese Kwiatkowski. I'm the Director of Special Education for the Wauwatosa School District. You should have received the executive summary for our Cradwell contract. So you have that information. I just wanted to give a little bit more context to this contract. As you recall, in September, you approved a contract for MyPath, and prior to that, you've approved our contract for CISA and Umbrook. These are contracts that we have every year. What's different with Cradwell is actually their price has gone up a little bit, and the actual annual cost for Cradwell, if we have a student enrolled there, is about a little over $20,200 if they would be enrolled there for an entire year. And we would be billed, if we had multiple students, our bill could exceed that. Just historically, as far as our use of Cradwell during my time here, within a given year, we may have as few as no students attending Cradwell, or the most I've ever had during my time here has been 3 students. So I just wanted to kind of give that context for you as you make a decision on this contract.
Thank you. Can you speak a little bit about the MyPath, CISA, Cradwell, Elmbrook? How do we determine which path is the appropriate path? What are the differences, the key differences between each path, just so we can all have an understanding?
Sure. Well, they're all for students with disabilities. So that's the common thing. They each kind of have their niche, I guess. MyPath schools, the Richardson schools, really specialize in students with autism. We use Fairview South for some of our more significantly disabled students. The CESA programs we use for some of our students with behavioral challenges or credit deficiency. And in the case of Cradwell, we've used them at times when we have had students who were either expelled from the district or potentially up for expulsion. That's been one of our uses for Cradwell in the past. So they each have their own kind of niche, and it's really in the end an IEP team will make the decision about what is the best placement. IEP team includes both the families. So families have the opportunity to tour any facility that they would be considering for an alternative placement before we would make that IEP team decision.
Okay. So the difference between Cradwell and say just having do the virtual option, because I know it's sometimes used as an option for some of the students who are expelled in the ambulance. So is the special needs?
Correct. It would be the special education services that they'd be getting.
So can you confirm then that what we're actually voting on is basically giving permission for this contract to be used anytime the student were to be placed in this situation? So it could be that this contract isn't used at all this year. It could be that this contract is used 2 times or 3 times. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then the reason this hasn't come to the board before is because it's been under $20,000, and now the tuition is over $20,000. That's why it's coming to the board now.
Correct. I don't believe it's been on consent agendas in the past. And it's always because it's been less than $20,000. I want to say it's run around 18 to 19,000. This is the first time it's actually hit 20,000.
Okay. And then in terms of the number of students we have out of district, is that information that we can get on a more regular basis, whether it's biannually, like how many students total would you say end up not being served within the district?
It's a fluid number.
Right.
You know, so I mean, it's certainly something that I could share more information about.
Yeah.
Right now,
it's a low percentage.
yeah, very small. I would say less than 1%. Less than 1% of our students with disabilities.
Yeah. And in the case of Cradwell, a student could go to Cradwell for a short period of time, a semester, and come back.
Correct. And that's true with any and all of the alternative placements that we use. Those decisions have to be made annually by IEP teams. Sometimes there's some other extenuating circumstances, but ultimately an IEP team would make that decision annually on that placement.
So even if a student goes to Cradwell or Fairview or whatnot, their IEP team is meeting regularly to make the determination that their needs are being met here or their needs have been met, and they can be returned to their original placement in the TOSA schools.
Correct. We have those conversations regularly about students and their transition readiness is what we call it. And I'm involved in all of those IEP meetings. So kind of as well as always the building principal and a case manager from the building. So those are ongoing conversations that we have not just at the annual IEP, but throughout students' enrollment.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other board comments or questions? Ms. Ryan?
I guess the only other question about is this sort of like the only or like the primary option for a student with special needs who might be facing expulsion? Is there any other program locally that we've considered, or?
Usually the CESA programs are another option that we tend to use more frequently, just because CESA is it's part of, well, you know what a CESA is. And so it's a public agency, whereas Cradwell is private. So when I think of least restrictive environment, I think of, public agencies would be the next step for a student. So we primarily use CESA alternative programs for those options.
Okay. Any other board questions? Seeing none, any community comments on this one? Jamie, anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Neufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dillon.
Yes.
Thank
We'll
you.
Move on. Thank you. Move on to business services action items, approval of the merit as a memorial fund donation.
It is recommended the school board approve the $20,000 donation to Wauwatosa West High School from the Mary Kaiser Memorial Fund. And I so move.
Second.
Board members, Mary Kaiser graduated in 2014 from Tosa West, a 4-year member of the choir, theater, and dance team programs. After high school, Mary obtained her bachelor's degree in psychology from WSD in 2018. She passed away on April 1st, 2021, a month shy of her 25th birthday from a fast moving brain infection that took her life within 3 days. Mary's family and friends have asked the donation be used toward student scholarships for graduating seniors involved in schools, theater, and choir programs, redesign and renovation of the performance art showcase in the lobby of Tosa West to highlight the look of students' upcoming performance art events, opportunities, and awards. Any board comments on this?
Yes, just a heartfelt thank you to the family. And you know, there's been a long family with a lot of support, so thank you.
Absolutely.
And I just want to say, I was recently at the Tosa West show, and it was wonderful to see Mary recognized in the program, and for all of her contributions. And it's just lovely when in an awful situation like this, we can do something to honor and celebrate that person and the student for how they contributed to the Tosa schools, and in this case, particularly the performances.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, what an amazing gift. My only question, just feel like I have to ask it, is how 100% do we feel about being able to grant these requests as to how the donation be used? And just gotta make sure, right? What assurances do we have that it'll be used to fund these things? If there's anything like board action that's required to do that, or is that just Dr. Means to just take care of that? Or just want to make sure that $20,000 comes in and it goes out in a way that
I think the business office will provide oversight on the use of those funds.
want to make sure.
I think that's a great question, though, Sean, in that does it just go right to the Tosa West Players Fund? Or is it something managed by the district, or, how do we make sure that they're able to spend it in a way that seems fitting?
Traditionally, once this type of donation is approved by a board of education, then the local high school establishes structure to ensure that there are stakeholders involved in the disbursement of the funds. So I will work with Ms. Grace to start creating that structure, and also create notes for our business office so they're also able to provide oversight. So that'll create 2 different layers.
Just want to thank the family, and just a really thoughtful tribute to great team member.
Certainly, I would echo those comments. It's great that they've chosen to honor their local in this way. Any community comment on this? Those in the room? Jamie, is there anyone online?
Yeah, we do have one hand raised. Janice, you have the microphone. Please state your name and address. We have an attendee that's listed as Janice. You have the microphone. Please state your name and address. You're still muted, Janice. There we go. Janice, would you like to comment? Okay.
Thank you,
I've
Jamie.
muted that user.
Ms. Newman, please call.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Neufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dillman.
Yes, thank you. We'll move on to approval of the benefits plans, plan renewals, health, dental, vision, and more. Phillips, sure.
It is recommended that the school board approve renewals of the benefit plans, which include health, dental, vision, and life, and I so move.
Second.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jennifer Foch, the Director of Human Resources. And typically, this would be an item brought forth by the business office. There's a lot of overlap between our two departments. We work closely together. Typically, as I said, business would bring this forward tonight, but in the absence of those administrators, I've been working with our consultant in the business office, and it was his recommendation that we put these renewals before the board tonight. But these are annual renewals for the dental, life, health, and vision.
You want to just go into who Mr. Dixon is and why he made the recommendation that this come before the board from a best practice standpoint.
Yeah, because they're annual renewals and because this being a large part of our budget, the salary and benefits of our employees, he indicated that this would be best practice. And Mr. Dixon is a longstanding school business manager, he has an excellent reputation. He's trained a number of other business officials in the area. He's highly regarded for his work, and we're happy that he's been able to step in and help us out.
So contextually, board members and community members, it's our understanding that in the past, this has not come before the board for your approval for a long time. And in fact, Ms. Foch asked the question of me. Again, I think it's been referenced. I worked in the district years ago from 2002 to 2005, but that was during a pre-Act 10 environment. So I vaguely remember bringing this to the board in conjunction with a potential settlement with the Wauwatosa Education Association. I think in a post-Act 10 environment, this type of procedure may not be as clear to people. That's why we're very, in school boards and school districts, that's why we're really appreciative of Mr. Dixon and his analysis and his recommendation for best practice moving forward.
Any board questions or comments inside? Sure.
Well, thank you for bringing this to us. And I'm not moving to the next agenda item yet, but the two are related to the policies of our stop loss insurance. It would be good if we further expanded our practice and we had discussion of these things in collaboration with the employees, get their input. So it's a difficult, it's something I want to vote yes for insurance for our employees. And it's something that when I vote yes, I want to know what I'm voting on and what they think about it. So this puts me in a good spot because I get to vote, puts me in a bad spot because we haven't discussed what we're voting on and there hasn't been opportunity for input from the stakeholders. Can you tell me, Dr. Means, is there any significant change from our practice over the past year or two? And we'll just have to, of course, we trust you, but given recent yes votes where it came back to haunt us, we have to do more as a board. So can you help us there? Is there any significant change to this year's plan as compared to the previous year where our employees would be surprised to find out that something is different this year as compared to last year?
It's a very fair question.
Absolutely. Yeah, so there were no significant plan changes other than some updates by UHC, but Dr. Means and I had confirmed and with UHC right before the renewal that there were no major additions or subtractions to our plan. It's the premiums even to have remained the same for health, dental, and vision for this year as compared to last year.
Okay.
So our employee coverage on the whole is not affected.
Okay, thank you. And as we understand this topic isn't in the right bargain, but that doesn't preclude us from getting stakeholder input, as I'm sure as we get our processes up and running under your administration, Dr. Means. that's just your way to do things to get stakeholder input. So hopefully next year we have our processes in place to in advance gather the input on whether our current plan offerings meet needs for the current world that are in place with it. Thank you.
Mr. Meyer, thank you for the opportunity. All I would share is that as I transitioned into the organization, one of the talking points and objectives that the board provided me was to create opportunities for stakeholder feedback. Ms. Foch and I are currently in discussions and having collaborative talks with our with teachers around compensation. We're really excited about that conversation. But I would go one step further in stating that I believe in this state, post Act 10, school districts really reacted differently to how to engage stakeholders and how to collaborate with them. It's my intent to find ways that not only are we talking about compensation, but teachers are not in it simply for compensation. Benefits are really important. And so we'll find ways to solicit their input as well. And I guess the last thing we'll share is that, as Ms. Foch shared, that the maintenance of these plans rests in the business office, but the solicitation of feedback and getting counsel from the employees who are most impacted by these plans does come through human resources. So the more work to be done. Thank you.
Mr. Meyer, just to clarify too, anecdotally, when I've offered people employment, or I've gotten some of the feedback in my listening sessions that I'm conducting currently at schools, we have received a lot of positive feedback about our benefits coverage, particularly that we don't charge premium, and those are governed by board policies. So any amendments to the plan regarding that would have to come through board policy as well, because we guarantee the premium coverage, and that's delineated by each employee group benefit plan.
I really like to have the board hear from stakeholders themselves on things of this importance. So I hope we can move in that direction. Thank you.
Ms. Riley.
One, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for being able to secure similar rates. It is highly unusual in benefits to not see pretty big jumps. I know my own medical rates went up by, I think, 12% this year. And so it's just outstanding work. So thank you for that. Thank you for doing that for our staff. Mr. Meyer, you and I must have been sharing a brain, because coming in tonight, the question that I was going to ask is this something that like the teacher advisory or staff advisory team sees, or like who actually weighs in or is engaged in the process? And it sounds like that's something that you all are trying to figure out. Prior to coming to the meeting tonight, I was on the phone with a long-term, very well-respected teacher. And to Dr. Means' point, it's not about the compensation. It's not just about the benefits. It's about them feeling like a part of the district, a part of the decision-making, a part of, what they're so passionate about. So I don't think we can underestimate where and if they want to be engaged. So I'm happy to hear that there are some possible opportunities for things like this moving forward, and not just through WEA, but also just, whether it's through the survey that we're doing, through Culture Amp or whatnot, figuring out how do we give lots of different opportunities to make sure that we're hearing from our key stakeholders.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just add, I think that's another opportunity that we have with our engagement survey that we recently approved. Regulate feedback from our teachers. So, anybody else have any comments or questions? Any public comments? Most in the room? Seeing none, Jamie, anyone online?
No hands raised.
Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Braley?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Ms. Neufeld? Yes. Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Rowland?
Yes.
Mr. Dolman?
Yes. We'll move on to approval of stop loss coverage with Metro Life Insurance. Mr. Rollins.
It is recommended the school board approve the stop loss coverage with Symetra Life Insurance, and I so move.
This would be another part of our annual. Oh,
We don't, we have
we have a second.
Second.
Sorry, we're a little slow.
It's okay. I was ready. It's part of our annual renewal to look at stop loss because our health insurance is a self-funded plan. So this essentially protects us from some of the more catastrophic claims that we might incur on our.
What is self-funded?
That means the district itself is paying for the insurance. We're not paying. United Healthcare facilitates, but the district is setting aside the money to pay the bills itself.
And so there's significance of a stop loss coverage with a self-funded plan.
It's vital.
And why is it vital?
Because with any catastrophic claim that we might have, this insurance would step in and make sure that we can continue to fund our plan.
So if I may, essentially, losses above a certain amount are not self-insured. That for the big payouts above a certain dollar value, we have outside insurance to cover that.
And yes, sir. And I think, going back to the comment that was made earlier, a major reason why we were able to have such flat rate increases is because we had good experience. There are certain years where we don't have good experience. And so I think it just emphasizes and underscores the statement around having stakeholder input, because without their good experience, then we're unable to afford the insurance. And so self-funded is a collaboration in the way I see it. And so, but in certain cases where there are catastrophic cases, and I want to tap into my human resources world, the first and foremost concern for the organization is to make sure that that staff member or their family is taken care of and is okay. So it's not about dollars and cents. But once we get past that issue, and I want to before I move on, because that there may be a need for a leave of absence, there may be a need for EAP support. So I want to make sure that when we talk about self-funded insurance, that we're thinking about the person first. But on the business side of things, and thank you again to Ms. Fox for stepping in and presenting this, there's a stop loss coverage conversation we need to keep in mind. And that's why this insurance is so, as you stated, vital to our organizational and financial health.
Any other board questions or comments?
Yes, Dr. Means, as part of our process over the next year, it would be helpful to me to, in some capacity, educate the board more on the principle of the stop loss, that it can be above, it could be a higher amount, it could be a lower amount. It has to do with our risk strategy. And there are choices we might be interested in doing that we have. And likely we accept recommendation of the business office because the actuarial work has all been done and analyzed. But there are choices there that I think a savvy board would want to know what's behind the recommendation. It doesn't mean we're going to override it, but it'd just be good to understand what's happening behind the scenes to come up with the calculations and the principles. Things.
Yes, sir. And I think it was 2 board members currently sitting here right now. You have been part of those conversations in the past in Wauwatosa. So yes, that is part of our vision moving forward. So.
Sure.
And this is just a request for the future, Dr. Means. One of the things that's become pretty clear since we joined the organization is that it's fair to say, for the public to say, that we have been very reactive to things that come before the board. And so I feel like you've done a significant amount of work to put things in front of the board that we didn't even know should have been in front of the board. I feel like the last several months have been a you don't know what you don't know sort of situation. And so something that I would like to request moving forward is, I know we look year long at planning our meetings and whatnot. I would love to have a better sense from HR, from the business office, et cetera, like what are all of the contracts that should be coming in front of the board so that we can do a better job of catching when something, slips through the cracks or whatnot. Versus finding out, that we should have seen this, or we should have seen something else 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago. And want to give you credit where credit is due, and that I feel like you are very much doing what the board asked you throughout the interview process and once you came on, which is dig in, figure out what's wrong with the systems and structures. Let's come up with systems and structures and best practices and guidelines. And let's give everybody a chance to rise to those expectations. And that applies to us as board members as well. And so that's something that I would find very helpful. I'm a very linear person. And if I know that this is something I should see in September, I will pay attention in September to say like, oh, what happened to this? Why didn't we get this? And you might say, oh, it's because this year it starts on October 1 and not September 1. Totally fine. But just a way for us to hold ourselves accountable.
Yes, ma'am, and we started the process in each division, each department to cross-reference and look at all their contracts and determine when they need to come before the board on an annual basis. So we're starting that process now. And we'll have that list for the board and community.
If I may add, it just comes to mind that the fact that we used to have to bargain these things made us need to understand it, and it somehow correlates with the loss of bargaining rights by the teachers, that the board drifted away from understanding some of these underlying principles, and we need to revisit that just as good practice. There's a little plug in there for the employees advocating their interest to us, so that it helps everybody when they do that.
The districts that have maintained strong employee loyalty and have not seen as much employee loss are the districts who approached a post-Act 10 environment, not so management heavy, but had more of a balance between still collaborating with staff and ensuring that the board and community was aware of these things. You're absolutely right, Mr. Meyer. There was a time where these conversations were annual, or at least on a 2-year cycle, due to a collective bargaining agreement. We are in the midst of putting structures in place where this becomes part of our way of work moving forward for the board, for our administration, and for the public.
Any other board questions or comments on this item? Any public comments on this item? Moving on. Seeing none, Mr. Price, anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
Please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Neufeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Doman.
Yes. Moving on to human resources action item, approval of ongoing agreement with Greater Occupational Health. Ms. Fraley.
It is recommended that the school board approve the ongoing agreement with Freighter Occupational Health, and I so move.
Second.
So as we were, just as we had recently talked about in the previous comment, going through the items that needed to be brought before the board, this is one of those items. So I found that the agreement was signed in July of 2020, but did not see it before the board. This is a little bit of an interesting one because there's not necessarily a set dollar amount that we spend every year that's per fee, whether it's a pre-employment physical or an N95 respirator questionnaire that will determine, and how many of those appointments are made, determine the overall expenditures there. So in some years it might be under the $20,000 limit, and in other years it may go over. So I felt it was important to get this before you tonight so that you knew who we were using for our occupational health. So our onboarding process for pre-employment physicals. And last year we did add the N95 respirator questionnaire, which is required in order to fit employees with the N95 masks. So those were two of the things that are covered under this particular agreement. Last year we had COVID testing. When COVID testing was taking a little bit longer and much harder to find, we've removed that as a cost, as COVID testing is more widely available, and even the at-home kits, which weren't available to us last year, are available now.
board comments or questions on this side? Sure.
Thank you. Is this an item where we would go out to different vendors again to find different pricing, different servicing? I know that we're in the year now, but in the future, is this something that we would pick around like other things where we get multiple bids? Bring us some board considerations.
Yes, we can do that. This agreement is ongoing and the terms of it are either party can end the agreement at any point. So if we should be doing that just as good practice. And I know that, I don't remember the year, but I know that was done not too long ago. We used to use a different vendor for the onboarding pre-employment physicals. I just don't know who that was. So.
Any other board comments or questions on this side?
I think it's I know we're going to talk about a policy committee in a few minutes, but there's policy in the district that states that if it's a renewal of a contract, that it doesn't have to continue to come back to the board. That may be policy that the board would want to look at. To your point, Mr. Rowland, maybe there should be a duration before we have to reevaluate and bring it back to the board. I think in some cases we've reviewed it and there's some contracts that have been in place for a long time. But per the policy language, it doesn't have to come back. I'm not used to that language of just the continued rollover. And so to your point, sir, I think I'm hoping that the policy committee will kind of get up and going and we can look at some of this language. It's not healthy for an organization, any organization. You get stagnant when you have one contract and you just continue to roll it over. I think some of the comments that have been made, it all kind of plays into one another. So the more we can refresh ourselves and be diligent around putting together good RFPs and reviewing things and ultimately bringing them back to the board and the public, it's a healthy way of going about business.
Any other board comments or questions on this side? I just want to thank Dr. Means for continuing to do this work that we've asked you to do as far as looking at our practices and our procedures, highlighting areas where we can do better. Really appreciate that. Support of this stuff. We'll move on to community comment on the side. Those in the room.
Mary Jo Randall, 727 North 69th Street. Just a huge thank you, Dr. Means, for all of the things that you just said. There was a time, as you said, when a lot of this was in place and was happening. And under the current climate, there is a lack of trust at this point in time. So this is going to be a very healthy way to help people gain some trust in the board specifically. Along the same lines, there used to be a practice, and I don't know when it stopped, but I think there's 4 action items on the agenda tonight that they would be presented at one meeting and voted on at the next. What that did was allow people to ask questions in the interim. You know, I can comment, but I can't get any questions answered about any of these action items that you're approving tonight. So by doing, a presentation, one meeting, and a vote the next meeting, even board members may have questions that they could ask in the interim, but certainly community comment or community members had an opportunity to contact the board and ask questions for them to consider in their vote at the next meeting. So I think I would really appreciate it if you would consider going back to that practice. It's not a policy, it's a practice. Thank you.
The board is currently considering it, but I'm working with Dr. Means to look at our meeting schedule and our meeting. Certainly one of the topics that we're reviewing and have discussed as a board.
It's always my preference. Although I do want to call out, I appreciate the board getting the materials and the materials being made available to the public with more time. That's been a change that you made, Dr. Means, that for me as a processor, to Ms. Randall's point, I have more time to process and read and whatnot. But I think that it's a best practice that, we've used and gotten away from a little.
And
For a myriad of reasons.
And in changing our meeting structure, this was our first practice that we were going to put in place, was getting into a good cadence of getting this information to us, which Dr. Means and his staff has done. So I think the next step is the logical one to look at as we talk about this. Any other community comment from those in the room? Anyone online, June?
There are no hands raised.
Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Ms. Newfeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dolan.
Yes. We'll go forward with the superintendent action item. Dr. Jessica, approval of the standing school board policy.
It is recommended that the school board approve the creation of the standing school board policy committee, and I so move.
Mike Phillips. You want a second on that?
Oh, yes, second.
There you go. Your idea, man.
Thank you. All right.
Oh,
All right.
I think we're going to hear from Mr. Phillips.
Yeah, I'm going to share. Cool, worked. So over the past several months, some instances have come up. One was a general board session from Dan Neerad from WSD talking about, a good, effective board governance. Another one was we had Deb Falk-Palak in here talking about one of our proposals or one of our policies that referenced an outdated law. We had just a number of instances that have come up recently, and as far back as August and September, just started thinking about, what can we do to really get an action around policy. I also feel like with a new administrative team led by Dr. Means, the ability to provide solid guidance, clear, current policies, gives him the freedom and the understanding with how to execute this position in the best way possible. So during the session on 9/18, on September 18th, Dan Neerad talked about, what are the 5 core functions of a school board that really achieve at high levels? It's relationships, it's painting that vision for the district, it's creating levels of accountability, metrics of accountability, being the community leader in that community interface, and then also policy, right? By creating policies with which the district can be governed. As we dive deeper into that, this is again from WSB to establish, what we need to do is establish that vision, which I know we're about to undertake our second look for this group as in terms of our strategic plan, provide general oversight and accountability for the administration, something that's very clear, right? That the folks that are carrying out the mission of the district can understand, not be confused by, know exactly what it means to do great work, know what it means to be outside of that framework. Our other role is to hire and evaluate the superintendent, our district administrator, attend to the relationship that we have between the two, and understand the difference between the role of the board and the role of the administration team. And then to establish, review, and update policies as needed, something that's sorely been lacking over the past several years. We have a great committee, advocacy committee, that does advocate for the district and students and the community. I think that's very nicely set up, and we're doing a good job there. Adopting a budget, and then working on the school board's internal leadership development, meaning all of us, working with each other, paying attention to what's going on around the country in terms of school boards, looking to organizations that are there set up to help school boards function in a very high way to really so that we have student achievement that we're looking for. So really why I highlighted that establish, review, and update policies as needed is because that's something that has been absent. So taking from an article from WASB from 2016, why policy work? Why are we talking about prioritizing policy work right now? Why are we talking about standing up a committee, a working committee of the board to really get focused on policy work? And it's for 3 reasons. It's for accountability, that providing of clear guidance and directions,
support for the board, the administrator, and the staff, so they know exactly what is expected of them, every day. If I'm an employee, understanding what that handbook says and what it means, that I get it in my hands on a regular basis, understanding how the processes and the policies fit together. Without strong policies, we can't have strong processes. And so you can see what happens when processes are allowed to break down. To provide consistency and continuity, this board will not be here forever, so our ability to set up policies that are up to date, that are in support of the mission of the district, is also going to help the next generation of board members that come on to hit the ground running. That we have a solid framework for them to go and do the business. And then efficiency, it saves times in meetings when we have good policies. They're super visible to the community. They're easy to access. When the community members or a member of our staff have questions about about different decisions that we've made in the past, how those translated into policy, that we do a good job of keeping those up to date, up to the times, making them extremely accessible for everyone that wants to know where to look. So the proposed committee structure, and just a little preface, is that trying to paint with more of a broad brush, because there's going to be a bit of expertise in the committee. I don't want to get too down in the weeds, so that the committee does not have the freedom with which to build itself in best practice. So just really going to just lay out a few of the key components of a proposed committee here for policy without getting too far in the weeds. So a standing committee, a working committee of the board, that'll be 2 voting school board members and the superintendent as an ex officio member to help guide the conversation, to help share how the policy turns into process and then procedure. What I'm proposing, or what we're proposing to the group tonight, is that members of the policy review committee be appointed by the board president on 1-year terms. I believe it's the same as advocacy committee. So it would follow similar suit as that other working committee. And then depending on what policies are being discussed, the superintendent can bring in other key staff members that are subject matter experts on the policy that we're reviewing. And also thinking about going to go to RFP to help engage an outside party. And for a couple of different reasons. I think number one, to help us really stand up, the nuts and bolts of this committee by using the experience of a third party of doing this in other districts. We'll go to an RFP. There's a couple of different firms out there that specialize in setting up policy review, but that won't be the only resource that we'll use to guide our policy decisions and our policy updates. Also be looking at other lighthouse districts that are similar in size, makeup, geography as Wauwatosa, and say, what have they done with policy? What can we learn from that? What are some best practices, or even what are some pitfalls that we want to avoid through this process? So there are a lot of policies. I don't know if you've taken the time to walk through them all, but there's quite a few. So the goal will be to meet monthly, tackle a few policies every month, ensuring that our policies are up to date. They reference the right law. They reference the right DPA statutes, that they are emboldened or encompass the strategic vision of the district, and correlate really well to the district procedures that enable the policies to come into action. So the goal is that there's 8 policy blocks. Yes, so it goes all the way 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, all the way up to 8,000. And the goal will be 2 policy blocks will be reviewed each year is the goal. And then all policies are reviewed on a 4-year cycle. So the school board, there is some flexibility. It's not like we have to go from 1 to 2 to 3. The school board can recommend policies to review first based on need or prioritization, like in the example I mentioned earlier, where our policy references a law that's no longer there. We might want to take that one up first, or in the first few, just to make sure that we're in compliance there. The committee will review the revisions to the policy and then bring back the policy recommendations to the board. There's really 3 severity levels here. One is to affirm the current policy, like no changes will be made, because we found that the policy is really good. It's working for the district. It's creating the environment and creating what we need it to do. There's been no updates. We've looked at other districts. We feel like we have a best practice there. That would be something recommending that would be on the consent agenda. The second one is a minor amendment to the current policy, where maybe we are updating the language to refer to a current law versus an old law, updating the language, but there's no significant change of substance there. So merely just some light edit to that, and we would bring that to the board and debrief the board on that change and the rationale provided. And then a major amendment. This is where we're really digging in and doing some major renovations to the policy itself. And some of the recommendations that have been made is to actually do that in a couple of different readings, where you read the policy, the amended policy. The board gets a chance, just like what Mary Jo was talking about, and having two sessions. The board gets a chance to weigh in, the community gets a chance to weigh in on that policy. Then we come back for a second reading and go through that again and adopt it if everybody is aligned. So that's the recommendation of the board policy committee. So the goal is to have that teamwork where we're working together. The board decides what gets done and what parameters limit what gets done, that policy making. And the administrators decide who does it and how to do it. So that teamwork, when policy is great, when our administration understands the policy, how it equates to procedures and how it hits the ground and how it affects people, I feel like that'll provide a launch pad for us to really do great things at the district.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Well, thank you for all the work that you put into putting this forward into a great discussion tonight. So with that, I'll start with board comments or questions.
Do we envision soliciting public input and having public comment at these monthly meetings?
It would be a working meeting of the boards, like an in-service. So that's been the framework that's been proposed, but it's certainly up for debate. Like I said, this is a sketchbook as to forming a committee, and then it would be up to the committee to go down that road. But I don't know, Dr. Means, in your experience, what is the level of public input in those sessions? Yeah.
I'm used to a model where we discussed it earlier with the structure of the first meeting you present information, the second meeting you vote. And so in between the first and second meeting, you create a platform for the public to provide feedback on what was presented from policy. And there are a lot of different digital platforms that people can provide feedback. They don't have to necessarily only offer it at the working meeting or the presentation meeting. So I think there are ample opportunities for the public to weigh in on proposed policy modifications.
I respectfully disagree. Seems lately we need all the help we can get. So I can't support this without public participation at the meetings. Thank you.
Understood.
One of the questions that I would be curious about is how the committee would to ensure that whomever the policy is impacting most directly is informing the creation of the new policy, right? So similar, I think, to what Mr. Myers was saying, a little bit different. How do we make sure on the front end before the new policy is even proposed that we have not just thought about it from the perspective of the folks who it impacts most directly, but have solicited ideas, suggestions, whatnot, so that what is being put forth has already been informed. So versus waiting for like responsive feedback.
Yeah.
That, and again, this goes to the conversation I just had with the teacher, where it's like, instead of saying, this is what we've decided, what do y'all think? We engage a little bit more on the front end, specifically when we're talking about policies that directly impact certain stakeholders.
Sure.
Ms. Fraley, I really like that suggestion. And I think that the coming to bottom up, top down, kind of how do we kind of examine some of these makes a lot of sense. And I think that I'm going to feedback throughout the process so that some folks may not have had an opportunity to engage early on, but they'll certainly should try. I like the idea of also Dr. Means' suggestion of the additional point that kind of gives us multiple layers of feedback. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Mr. Phillips, for bringing this forward. I like this plan very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. This is going to be a great and needed strategy that just cycles, which is awesome. The questions or suggestions I guess I got are, in my review of the policies, sometimes the policies are kind of shallow and then the administrative guidelines go really deep. So my question is, would this group also take a look at the administrative guidelines and just see how those interplay, or do you still see that as kind of your domain, or how's it going to work?
My past experience, Mr. Owen, is that when you have a standing policy committee, you don't have to be as shallow. Okay. In fact, it is recommended that the board become more explicit in what you want to see. As Mr. Phillips said, it should guide the work that we do. So the more tight you can be at the board level with policy, the better. And then that eliminates the need to then evaluate administrative guidelines.
Okay, that works. And I was just going to say, right, besides just like affirming what's there and then tweaking what we would want to change, I think there's probably all sorts of opportunity for just finding like new policies, innovation, or just gaps. So to have that as like an extra category, I'm sure if we looked at other districts or if we engaged an outside vendor, they would recommend something. I guess my only hesitancy on any of it is just the cost of engaging an outside vendor. My question, or I guess preference, would be to see if we could just shoestring this in the beginning. Like if we can muscle like people power, maybe to Mr. Meyer's point, in the beginning, to have more people pulling different examples from different districts, as opposed to engaging a vendor to provide us with, thoughts. And then I know that there's all sorts of like interest in us really being focused with the limited dollars we have. So if we didn't have to engage a vendor, but we could engage smart community, maybe that could be another way to do it. I know that there's drawbacks to that because there are groups that just do this for their job. So
I would say the number one drawback, Mr. Rowan, is that either the Wisconsin Association of School Boards or there's a national group by the name of Neola. They typically track state and or federal law changes that then will impact your policies. And so even when you have volunteers, you won't have that type of analysis of the laws that are then going to impact your policies. I would say respectfully, if there's a certain cap that the board would like to place on this type of vendor, that would be helpful in our RFP process. I know WASB, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, has a minimum price point for supporting with policies, and if there is a cap, I think that'll shape the RFP and maybe even direct us to WASB, which you already pay a membership fee for anyway as a school board. So based on your feedback, that would be my recommendation after listening to you. And I think at the same time, we will still have the proper legal guidance that we need.
And in talking to some of the former school board members that have done this before, they started off with a third party to help them get the guide rails and the processes. And then they got so good that they were able to move on without that support. But it really helped get it set up and get it going in the right direction and creating kind of that permanence and structure that you need without it, you know what I mean, whipsawing based on who's on the committee that year, right? So I think, I definitely see your point, and I see that in this point. There's a role for both.
Ms. Beagle.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this forward. I'm wondering what is the actual end process you're envisioning? When I look at the proposal, it seems as though you would like the entire policy manual to be reviewed within a 4-year cycle. And I am concerned that it will slow us down. For example, you brought up the fact of different law changes, Dr. Means, and I'm wondering the mechanism and how nimble we can be and how fluid it will be. So I guess, what are your thoughts? We have a policy, oftentimes, student services, human resources, other departments have brought to us changes. Would you in fact let that standard process happen in addition to reviewing some policies? Or does everything refer to the policy committee to then come back to the board? And I don't want to slow us down. That's my concern with this particular proposal. So that's my first train of thought. My second train of thought is along accountability and auditing, and those are other topics that we've talked about. So oftentimes policies can be interpreted, and the interpretation of the policy then guides the actions. Sometimes policies are meant to be broad, and then the board has some flexibility in how the policy is interpreted, and then eventually the guidelines, the administrative guidelines. So I just want to make sure we don't lose the values of the community in what we've already established in trying to, if we're going to try to micromanage the policy process. So those are my kinds of trains of thought. So.
No, those are good points. I think, you know, in the, I know I moved through that pretty quickly, but the board as an organization can prioritize policies to be reviewed. So that's part of the process. So there, you know, when you think about same procedure as kind of curricular review every 7 years, the goal is for all the policies to be reviewed every 4 years, but there is a flexibility built into this current framework to allow the prioritization of different policies, whether there's a misalignment to your second point with what the community is thinking, and that's the opportunity. But right now, those are sitting dormant and getting dusty. And so, you know, we are already at risk from alienating or having a gap between our policies and because no one is looking at them. So there's going to be flexibility on the front end to prioritize policies, or at least that's the way from the best practices that I heard. And then the board will also have a final way in on the approval of policies, whether they're too narrow, you know, to your second point, or too wide, right? And so we'll be able to, as a group, be able to really get a line of sight into exactly what we want that policy to say. And does it reflect, you know, our common vision, the school vision, the community vision?
I just want to make sure we're not, you know, bogging this down for sure. You know, I mean, it's a monstrous task. Over time, it's been done in many different ways, and what you see in board docs is one evolution of how the policies were updated. I just want us to be mindful of the structure, and if everything has to go to the policy committee before it can come to the board for evaluation, I am worried that we will be too slow on some things we need to get done.
But it's my understanding everything wouldn't go to the policy committee, right? That the different things in place would be reviewed against our policy, which at the current time, if nothing's been updated, it's that current policy, something's changed, then this would be updated policy. The things wouldn't go to the policy committee outside of just the policy review. Am I misunderstanding that?
The way I'm interpreting Springfield's statement, let's just take a scenario of let's assume Ms. Spotch in Human Resources finds a policy under the personnel series that needs to be addressed immediately. But we're currently reviewing policies in a series that addresses curriculum. And I think the statement that I'm hearing is, so how do we make sure that we don't get bogged down in that process? I think what Mr. Phillips presented, that would fall into that third tier of major adjustments that requires immediate attention. I think Mr. Rowland also recommended having a fourth tier of new or significant. And in that case, I've worked in a model where even though the current series isn't being reviewed by the policy committee, if there is an emergency, you bring that forth right away, and the policy committee will fast track it. So in essence, you have to have a fast track model or a fast track element to this in order to avoid getting bogged down.
Just for further clarity, like items that were brought to us tonight that we voted on contracts and things like that, those are not going to the policy committee first.
No, it's not a policy.
I just want to make sure that's.
No.
Any other board comments or questions?
Yes,
Mr. Mayor.
I move to amend to add language stating as follows: public and employee comment shall be required at all committee meetings. As a formal motion, please let it be shown in the record that I made the motion.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Any discussion on it?
So we're saying it's required. What if there are no staff or community at the meeting?
Well, then there's no one there. Just like our meetings here, we take public comment. There is no comment. The chair of the meeting acknowledges that comment was offered, and there were no. I don't want to get bogged down.
No. I just want to make sure that I'm
So we
understanding.
don't shut down the meeting if there's no public comment. You know, that there'd be a time. in the
An
meeting.
opportunity.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Sure.
yes. It's not to say that, the intent is not to say that if there's no public, if there's no one commenting, therefore we can't move forward. That is not the intent of that.
Okay.
It's to say that in the name of open government,
Sure.
participation and, you know, collaboration and stakeholders and all those good things that we all believe in, that these meetings allow organized public comment and employee comment. So, you know, we're, as I commented on an earlier agenda, the direct employee comment to the board is
Any discussion on this event?
Okay, thank you. And then also the mechanism then for meetings and recording minutes, and will there be a webpage
Yes, ma'am.
similar to how we're doing the legislative advocacy? Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
meeting notices, okay.
As a standing committee, that will be required.
The ability for, like say you can tag and follow a certain subject. Maybe, I don't know if our website can do that, but, obviously at higher level government, we have the ability to do that. Tag a certain committee if some people want to follow it and get notices of when meetings are. Twitter, I'm not sure what we can use. So, because that's part of our struggle, right? We're not sure when someone can receive the information. They're not always looking at the website. So if they're interested in something, it would be nice if there would be a mechanism for sure.
Any other comments on the event before we go on?
So just one additional comments, last question. Ms. Meefeldt, for the legislative advocacy committee, folks can sign up to get updates like when a meeting is happening.
Yes.
But to Mr. Meyer's motion, I would want to make sure we don't lose opportunities for folks to give feedback outside of the public meeting, just because these meetings tend to be on the smaller side. And I think it would still be important that folks have the opportunity to raise comments or questions after the first reading, in between when it comes to the board. So I just want to make sure that we don't lose that thread.
I believe Mr. Myers had said this to both.
Of course, I
just want to be as explicit as
I
possible.
never saw opportunity for an email input as precluding somebody coming to the microphone. If they wanted to do both, they could do both. The more input, the better.
Great.
I mean, it's a problem to have so much input that it starts to be, the meetings go long and people are interested, and that's what our government is supposed to be about, in my mind. So I'm all the happy, all the more input, that we have.
All right, let's first take a vote on the amendment. We'll go to public comment.
Public comment on the event.
Ready to vote.
Well, just still,
I thought we was.
it's up to you, the chair.
Yeah, let's vote on the amendment and we'll. Policy.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Jessica Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Newfeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Rowland.
Yes.
Mr. Doman.
Yes. Are there any, go ahead.
Thank you. My only, I love this. My only question is like board capacity, and I wonder if we can, at the next meeting, just put out all the other committees that exist within the school board. Just put this all on the table and see how this fits in. Does something else come off? Does something, like, as we're adding a priority, does something come off or like deprioritize, or are we just adding? I just worry about our horsepower and ability to keep up with this in the way where we have two people that can just like be fired up on this, or will they be burnt out in a year and then we'll just step church, and you know what I mean? So if we could agenda a meeting to talk through just like what are we all involved in at the next meeting or soon, that would be wonderful.
To my thinking, Mr. Rowland, this does not work if we do not have some sort of support from experts, professionals, things like that. As you're recognizing, Mrs. Newfeld was here when we first implemented all these policies. It's a massive, massive piece of work to go through these things line by line. And it's not unusual for people to get stuck for quite a number of minutes debating wording on one line on a 6-page policy.
Yeah.
So I think that the board needs to understand that this committee is a working process to see how this goes and to report back to the full board or president on a regular basis as far as is it working? Do we need to modify our process in order to make it effective and efficient?
Mr. Meyer, could you share how in the past, when these policies were developed, how were they reviewed once they were developed?
And Mrs. Newfeld was there as well. We had a much smaller set of board policies that was sort of, I believe, homegrown. And they were modified before my time on the board. And then Dr. Ertl came to us with this sort of canned set of policy books, very robust. And the idea was that it would basically cover everything, because it incorporated best practices from all over the place and had legislative citations and such. And we were supposed to purchase a subscription to have that company provide us periodic renewals and updates. And it seems that we didn't do that. Another thing that fell by the wayside, I was there, so I own that falling by the wayside myself. And then we saw in HR that Mr. Hubble, he was in charge of it. He was an attorney, very experienced and capable. He would come to us with periodic technical updates. With respect to the first implementation of all the policies, we broke down into subcommittees of the board that had some very long, intense meetings on specific language. It took a while. And so that's my memory of it, as far as I can recall.
So then there hasn't been really a thorough review as well. Proposing tonight in over 10, 15 years.
Mr. Newfeld, how long has it been?
I can't quote a year. We haven't been taking big batches of policies in several years.
Easily 10 years. I mean, I think back it was, yeah.
Well, I mean, we had a process where the entire board met and went through every policy in different mechanisms and in services and over the course of time. That's why I'm saying it's a huge undertaking. And it's good work. What I like best about it is the shared leadership and that the administrative team is very involved also in the process. Obviously, they're very involved, and I, on that note, am a bit concerned with the ability and the capacity of our administrative team to be able to do that, given a lot of the priorities that we have. So I also don't want to an overbearing process that inhibits the good work we're doing with students.
I share your concern. I think, this is quite an undertaking for sure, but I struggle with that. It's necessary. It hasn't been done for 10 or 15 years. It's, far overdue work like this. So I'm trying to balance that because I definitely hear what you're saying. We don't want to take away the work that Dr. Means and the staff are doing for students. Or we can find a meaningful way to do.
I think it's essential that we have two principles. One is, look, man, keep it moving. We got to keep this moving, make progress. And on the other hand, we need to report back to the board. This 1/4 of the policies every year is a goal. And if we find we're falling behind, we need to report back to the board so we can come to some understanding about expectations and do we need more resources? Do we need to prioritize some versus the other? But as long as the process keeps moving, so we don't just not do it at all, I think we've improved ourselves.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, especially when it comes into kinds of staff and things like that. To this people's point, that is good. Going back to Sean's point about the RFP, I guess my request would be that regardless of the dollar amount of the RFP, if it's below our $20,000 threshold, that this comes back before the board just so we have a window into what this is costing. I don't have any sense of it. But less more than $20,000.
It won't be 20,000.
I think it should be a good topic.
Sure.
We don't have enough. I do know. Not necessarily that if it doesn't have to be approved, that's okay. For our policy, it doesn't have to be approved. I think it's worth discussing.
Since this is the board's work, it should come back to you. So understood.
Any other board comments or questions before we go to public comments? Public comment from anyone inside the room on this topic of a proposed policy.
Mary Jo Randall, 727 North 59th Street. Mr. Phillips, this was an excellent presentation, well thought out. And as you're talking and I'm able to look at this at the same time I'm hearing all of you, I do see answers to the questions that all the board members are bringing up that you've incorporated in here. I think the standing committee piece of it is what will be new and what will make this work. The fact that it is a standing committee. We used to have standing committees. We had personnel committees, policy committees, and so on. And it was under the same premise where they would meet as a committee. And then I think what you will find in that committee is you're not going to find massive, immediate amounts of change needed, but you will be checking and you'll be keeping it up to date. And Dr. Means and his team have ongoing responsibility, as he said, for legislative changes. A lot of that would happen, for instance, in special education. A lot of changes would come up and the director would then bring that to Dr. Means, bring it to the board. So it's two separate things. It looks and sounds massive, but I think what you've done with this proposal is make it manageable. And I like how you put in, or what you put in about the importance of policy work. And when all is said and done and you're worried about, mechanics and time and so on, go back and take a look at that. It's a great idea, and I commend your work on this. Thank you.
John McClure, 772 North 116th Street. I too like this proposal. I think it has a lot of good potential. I do want to thank Mr. Myers for his amendment, and must be 100% agreement with him that it is extremely important that the public have input into any of these policies. Despite some discussion during one of your in-service meetings and some attempts by some board members to limit public comments, I feel that the more public comments on any of these issues is very, very important. We're talking about having 3 people, and 2 of them being board members, along with Dr. Means, to do this. The board, it's putting an awful lot of power in just certain individual members. In a lot of cases, boards and committees also have outside input from members of the public as members at large and stuff like that, which may be valuable, but at least if you're allowing public comment on the items, it's a step in the right direction. I think this has a really good potential to make some improvements to the district. Thank you.
Mr. Price, is there anyone online?
We did have someone with their hand raised, but she's lowered it again, so no.
Any final comments from the board before we vote?
Mr. Doman, that person's raised their hand again.
Thank you, Jamie. Go ahead.
Deb Falk-Palak, you have the mic. Please state your name and address.
Yes, thank you. And I'm sorry about my hand issue. This is Deb Falk-Palak, 7435 West Wells. Thank you, Mr. Phillips. I do like this proposal. I do like what Mr. Myers included in the amendment regarding public comment. And I do think this can be manageable. I've sat on policy committee in a healthcare environment, and you can only imagine how many policies there can be in that type of environment as well. And so I love the fact of having public comment and content experts on different things. I think we have an incredible community in Wauwatosa of people that just want to help, want to do things, want to see change, want to see improvement for our students in our school district. I would love to have this. And of course, I'm always going to be putting in my plug for a disability related committee in the district. So thank you very much.
The other hand raised, Jamie?
There are no more hands raised.
So just one last clarification. So if a member has a policy idea that would, I just want to understand my process. Would that school board member send the policy to policy committee? Would that person send it to president, superintendent to consider put on the agenda? Because how would that work for school board folks who are not on the policy committee?
I would recommend that go to the policy committee.
I would recommend it goes to the chair of the policy committee.
Thank you.
So I think that's an important clarification that we know. That we all agree that it could be reasonable and fair to say that policy committee agenda items must be referred by the board president, for example, but we're not saying that. We're saying the opposite. The agenda is set by the committee itself. Is that just so we know what we're saying?
What I heard from Mr. Rowland is if a board member who's not on the standing committee, the standing policy committee, they have an idea around a policy, it's within their purview to send it to the chair of the policy committee for review. That should not have to go through the opinion of your employee. It should not have to go through the board president. It shouldn't have to come through me. You create a standing committee for a reason.
Okay, I agree with that, but we hadn't explicitly said it until Mr. Rowland raised
I
the question.
appreciate
And
this.
I think that's very helpful.
Appreciate this.
So we know our assumptions and we said them out loud. Okay, thanks.
Sorry, I just have one other item that I thought of. So since we are sort of in the middle of an election cycle. So if I were to appoint people to the committee, if we were to approve it tonight, would I then, or would the next president, whoever is elected president, appoint people in April or May, that would be legislative ed this committee, or is it going to be a year from this first appointment? Does that make sense? I recommend doing it based on election, just to get that rather cycle.
Typically, with the reorganization meeting of the board, that's when your standing committee appointments are also identified.
So maybe this first appointment is just between now and that time, and going forward, we do it on a yearly basis. That makes sense.
And in fact, we could, whoever is on the policy committee, put those things explicitly in writing. So it's, right, that would be
Maybe
good.
for businesses.
Right, yeah,
Rules
yeah.
around policy,
Yep.
policy,
Right.
policy committee, yeah.
Sure. Like that we talked about, I think it's important, but that would be something for the committee to do.
I'd also like to add that there may be policies, I don't know if this is the fifth thing, that could be retired potentially as well. I don't know, get outside of that. There might be policies, they haven't been reviewed in 10 or 15 years. There might be some data that.
Thank you. One other point of clarification. All the policies come to the full board for a vote
Correct, yes.
with the detail of what language is being changed or kept the same and or retired.
And the reason why.
Least.
Yes. And maybe my statement earlier around public comment wasn't clear, but typically there's a first reading and then a final vote of the board. And in between the first reading of the policy and the final vote, there is opportunity for public comment. So obviously you've amended the amendment this evening to allow public comment at the policy committee level, but there's also public comment opportunity when it's having its first reading, when the first reading is presented to the board.
And also for the vote.
Yes.
Yes, and for the vote for first and second reading. Yes.
And for emails and.
Yes.
Can't say we're
So there will be ample opportunity for the public to weigh in.
All right, any other comments or questions? Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Joseph Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Muehlfeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dillon.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Phillips, for all your work. We'll move on to final public comments on non-agenda items. Is there anyone in the room that would like to make further public comment on non-agenda items? Seeing none, Jamie, is there anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
May I have a motion to adjourn into executive closed session for Wisconsin statute 19.851 C and G to discuss personnel matters with legal counsel.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Newman, please call the roll.
Ms. Fraley,
Yes.
Dr. Joseph Banger,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Muehlfeld,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Dillon.
Yes, we are in closed session and we'll reconvene as soon as we possibly can.